The United States has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prisoners. And I think what's going on is also what's going on as to why we haven't adequately controlled the police. Politicians believe that what's best for them is to seem tough on crime.
Yeah.
Make things more criminal with longer sentences. Why don't the politicians impose controls on the police? Even after the death of George Floyd, not much has been done by legislatures to restrict what police can do. I think the politicians perceive that their best interests in terms of re-election are to always seem tough on crime.
It's my pleasure to welcome Erwin Chemerinsky to the show. He is Dean and the Jesse H. Chopper Distinguished Professor of Law Award at University of California at Berkeley School of Law, founding Dean of the University of California Irvine School of Law, and President-elect of the Association of American Law Schools. He is the second most frequently cited American legal scholar and the most influential person in legal education in the United States. He's the best-selling author of several legal textbooks and the book entitled Constitutional Law, Principles and Policies, and the new book, Presumed Guilty, How the Supreme Court Empowered the Police and Subverted Civil Rights. Erwin, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be with you.
It is my pleasure. I've followed your work for many years, and that introduction was kind of a mouthful. You've got quite a resume, my friend.
So kind. Thank you very much.
Yeah. But your latest book, which, by the way, is doing very well sales-wise, just recently came out. Congratulations on that. There's obviously a lot of talk about the police and police brutality, overstepping their bounds, etc. How did the Supreme Court enable this?
There are several constitutional provisions that are meant to control the police. The Fourth Amendment limits when the police can stop or arrest or search someone. The Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination affects how the police are supposed to question someone. Due process limits things like how police are supposed to do identification procedures like lineups. But throughout American history, the Supreme Court has interpreted these provisions to empower, not to control the police. And that's contributed mightily to the racialized policing that we have in the United States.
Give us some examples of that. I mean, we've all heard the stories of, the criminal got away because the police didn't read him his Miranda rights. And I don't know if those are actually true or if they're urban legends, but, give us some examples of this, if you would.
Sure. I begin the book with the story of Adolph Lyons. He's a 24-year-old black man in Los Angeles. He was stopped by police one night for having a burnt-out taillight. The officer ordered Lyons out of the car. The officer slammed Lyons' hands above his head under the roof of the car. Lyons was complaining that the keys that he was holding were cutting into the skin of his palm. The officer thought that Lyons was, quote, mouthing off and administered a chokehold on Lyons. The officer literally put his forearm around Lyons' neck and choked until Lyons was unconscious. Lyons awoke. He had urinated and defecated. He was spitting blood and dirt. He was given a traffic ticket and allowed to go. He did some research and discovered at that moment, 16 people in Los Angeles, almost all like him, black men, had died from police use of the chokehold. Lyons sued the city of Los Angeles for an injunction to stop police from using the chokehold, except if necessary, protect the officer's life or safety. But the Supreme Court ruled that Lyons could not sue for an injunction because he could not show that he personally was likely to be choked again in the future.
Wow.
The failure of the courts to stop the chokehold is what led to the death of Eric Garner, George Floyd, and many others.
So could this be resolved through simply liability? It's always the city or the department that bears the burden of the liability, but I think that's shifting to where the actual officer committing the wrongdoing could be held liable, right? What's the liability situation?
And I discussed that in great detail in the book. Officers are liable if they violate the Constitution, except the Supreme Court has said that officers have a defense. Sometimes it's absolute immunity from liability. Did you know that if an officer lies in court as a witness and it leads to the conviction of an innocent person, the officer can't be sued for money damages, even for intentional perjury? There's absolute immunity.
That's incredible. However, they rarely even pursue that anyway, right?
If a prosecutor knowingly uses perjurious testimony, or a police officer knowingly commits perjury, even if it leads to the conviction and imprisonment of an innocent person, they have absolute immunity. But where there's not absolute immunity, officers always have what's called qualified immunity. And it's been interesting to see how much this phrase, qualified immunity, has come to be part of the public's vocabulary. And what the Supreme Court has done is said, and I'm quoting verbatim, qualified immunity protects all but the plainly incompetent officer. Both liberals and conservatives have criticized in recent years how much qualified immunity has become like absolute immunity, and how difficult it makes it to sue a police officer who violates somebody's rights.
Just more broadly for a moment, I know that people are thinking about how America has it's become this incarceration business in this country. How much of the privatized prison industrial complex plays into this? I mean, of course, before they get there, it's police brutality, and that's what we're talking about. But I just don't want to forget to ask you that question. When you look at the incarceration rates in the U.S. versus other countries, what is going on? I mean, it is just, there's something wrong with our system, right?
You're right. The United States has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prisoners. And I think what's going on is also what's going on as to why we haven't adequately controlled the police. Politicians believe that what's best for them is to seem tough on crime.
Yeah.
Make things more criminal with longer sentences. Why don't the politicians impose controls on the police? Even after the death of George Floyd, not much has been done by legislatures to restrict what police can do. I think the politicians perceive that their best interests in terms of re-election are to always seem tough on crime. When's the last time a state legislature adopted a law to increase the rights of prisoners or criminal suspects?
Which is interesting because the entire basis of the founding of the U.S., its Bill of Rights, is to protect the individual against the government, to limit the government's powers. But, there is a balance. I mean, if you make it too difficult for the police, no one's going to want that job, and we do need police. They do,
and I have great admiration for police, but we also need to make sure that the police are controlled and stay within the Constitution. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. There's so many studies that have shown innocent people being convicted based on false eyewitness identifications. In fact, many of the people who have been exonerated when DNA shows them to be innocent, turns out that they were convicted because of an inaccurate eyewitness identification. Studies have shown that cross-racial eyewitness identifications are especially inaccurate when people are identifying those of races other than their own. Did you know that since 1986, which is when William Rehnquist became Chief Justice of the United States, there's only been one Supreme Court case, just one, dealing with eyewitness identifications, in that case found in favor of the police? We need to put controls on how the police conduct these eyewitness identifications that still allow them to exist. I understand their importance, but that make it much less likely that innocent people will be convicted.
Are those eyewitness, is that out in the field identifications or lineups or both?
It's all of it. So sometimes eyewitness identifications are lineups. Sometimes they're what's called show-ups, where a victim or a witness has one person asked, is this the culprit? Sometimes it's photo identification procedures, where the police officer will show the witness 5 or 6 photos. But we know that often it's done in a very suggestive way. Instances where police officer will show a witness 6 pictures and tap his finger on the one that he wants the person to identify, or instruct a lineup where the people look vastly different other than the suspect. We go on with all of the ways. And the Supreme Court has just ignored this problem.
Why do you think the Supreme Court has ignored the problem?
I think it goes to what you were saying earlier. I think that the Supreme Court has decided that we need to support the police in our society and is significantly throughout American history favored law enforcement and not the rights of suspects and not the rights of criminal defendants. And this has really led to very racialized policing. A Black man has 9 times more chance of being killed by the police than a white man. A Latino man has 4 times as much chance. You look at the studies, whether in San Francisco, near where I live, or Los Angeles, where I lived for so many years, or Greensboro, North Carolina, or New York City, and you find Black and brown people are stopped by the police so much more often than white people, holding everything else constant.
Yeah. It is really scary when you see anybody in a position of power of any kind, police or otherwise, abusing their power. Very, very disconcerting. You go through in the book, you talk about the Warren Court a lot and hollowing out the Fourth Amendment and Miranda rights. Tell us more about that.
Sure. With regard to the Fourth Amendment, it's important for people to realize is that the police can stop and search anyone, anytime they want. And that's not hyperbole. Let me tell you a specific case that I discussed in the book. It's a case called Wren versus United States. There were some undercover police officers driving around in Washington, D.C. They saw a car stop at a stop sign for what they thought was too long a period of time. It was 25 or 30 seconds. The police car decided to follow that car until the car committed a traffic violation.
Which almost every driver will at some point.
I once heard an estimate that if you follow any car for 15 minutes, they'll commit a traffic violation. Go a mile over the speed limit, change lanes or turn without a signal, not stop long enough at the stop sign. The police car followed that driver until it turned without a turn signal, pulled the car over for that. Now, in DC, undercover police officers are not allowed to enforce traffic laws, but that's what the stop was for. The officers ordered the driver and passenger out of the car. The officers did a search and found drugs in the car. The traffic stop was a pretext. The officers did it to search for drugs, but the Supreme Court said that doesn't matter. So long as the police have reasonable suspicion there's a violation of a traffic law, that's enough to make a stop. Well, as you and I both just said, if police follow anyone for even a short period of time, there's the ability to stop them and then to search them.
But they don't have the right to search without the permission of the driver or a probable cause, right? But here's the thing I want to say about that. Most drivers will just give up permission because they're intimidated, right?
First, police can frisk a person if police have reasonable suspicion that the individual has a weapon, which requires only that the officer say, I saw a suspicious bulge, and then they can do it. Second, when somebody is stopped by the police and they're in their car, the police can order them out of the car and search the area of the car that they were occupying, the driver's area, the passenger area. It doesn't take a warrant. It doesn't take consent. Then you get to, if none of that applies, if the police arrest somebody, even for a most minor traffic violation, and the police could arrest for a traffic violation, they can then search the person instant of the arrest. If they don't find anything, they can let the person go. Anything they find is admissible. And then, if none of that provides a basis, the police can say the individual consented. And we know that often the police lie about consent, or often sometimes people feel coerced. 3 cities in North Carolina adopted a law that said police could do consent searches only if they got written consent. And the number of consent searches fell dramatically.
I can imagine. What, did they have that on their ticket book? They would have a waiver that,
right.
Yeah. What about the cameras? I mean, are all of the cameras helping with civil rights, the body cameras, the patrol car cameras, et cetera?
Yes, both the body cams and the dash cams help both the police and the suspects.
It just depends, right?
Police, there are instances where the police have been falsely accused.
Right.
And having the recording shows what really happened. But we also know from the body cams and the dash cams that there are instances where police have engaged in egregious misconduct, shooting people in the back. So there's a real value of having video. I don't know that George Floyd would have been convicted without the video that a bystander was taking. Unfortunately, for both body cams and dash cams, too often, somehow they're just not working at the time that there's the allegation of excessive force.
And you didn't mean to say, just a moment, George Floyd. You meant to say the officer, right? Would have been convicted.
Right, I meant Derek Chauvin, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Derek Chauvin would not have been convicted for the killing of George Floyd if there hadn't been the bystander taking the video.
Sure. Yeah. The video camera is the ultimate liberator. It's really great. And it really scares me, Erwin, that several years ago, we all heard about Apple getting that patent on how they could turn off the cameras in the iPhones in a certain radius. And can you imagine police getting a hold of something like that? That would be terrible.
It's so important. And as I was saying, in the instance of Derek Chauvin being convicted for the death of George Floyd, I don't think it would have come out that way if a bystander hadn't been taking that video. And there are instances where the dash cams and the body cams you refer to have made all the difference in showing police misconduct. Or in exonerating police as well.
Yeah, it's for the police as well. But I've heard from police officers I've spoken with about that, is that their concern is that the police departments are really simply trying to avoid their own liability and shift that liability onto the officers with the cameras. That's what a lot of, well, I don't know a lot, but it's what some officers I've talked to say.
The important thing is the camera doesn't lie.
Right.
Now, of course, it doesn't show what happened before the camera began recording, and that can be disputed. And in terms of liability between cities and officers, it's a very complicated body of law. Unfortunately, as I show in the book, the Supreme Court has made it difficult, very difficult, both to sue officers and to sue the cities that employ them.
Mm-hmm. What's the path to reform? That's what you could leave us with. What needs to happen here to balance the power so that police can do their job effectively and want the job in the first place? Because from what I understand, it is getting very tough to recruit police officers nowadays, and that's not good either.
No, and I am not anti-police. I don't favor abolishing the police, but I do think we need reforms, and they're not going to come from the Supreme Court. So we need Congress, state legislatures, and city councils and police commissions to adopt reforms. Several cities have prohibited use of the chokehold in light of the death of George Floyd. Also, state Supreme Courts can interpret state constitutions to protect more rights. And the Justice Department has a statute that it can use to sue police departments when there's a pattern and practice of civil rights violations.
Okay, so those are some things.
Some of the
anything else? There's probably a whole bunch more,
There's
right?
a whole bunch, but those are some of the mechanisms for reform. Thank you so much for having me on the program, and I'd love to come back and talk some more another time.
Erwin, I know you've got another interview. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Give out your website.
I'm going to chair a meeting. My day job is being dean of a law school. I don't have a personal website, but Berkeley Law School has a website, and I'm part of that website. And so if you just type into any browser Berkeley Law and put in my name, I'm easy to find.
And of course, Presumed Guilty is available in all the usual places. So thank you, Erwin.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.